It's beautiful in here, isn't it? Across the span of decades, thousands of people have worshiped in this space. Hundreds have been baptized. Thousands of hymns have been sung. Sermons have been preached in times of war, pandemic, peace, and prosperity. Each of us has a deep and profound connection to this place that helps animate and inform our spiritual lives. All of us come seeking God, love, and community. As we begin our conversation about worship today, I'd like to restate the proposed foundational vision for our future together. That is,
we are called by God to be a thriving, imaginative community hub, providing opportunities for deep, reflective worship and spiritual growth, points of connection for fellowship, joy, and Christian education, and collective impact on social inequities through the intentional and comprehensive use of Union's resources and campus to enact our statement of purpose.
We are, of course, at something of a crossroads. In a post-pandemic world, the one we are all so eager for, how will we gather for worship? What have we learned over the last few years?
One of the lessons of Zoom worship in 2020 was how much we liked seeing one another's faces.
Christ, everybody. Sarah, good to see you, Amy.
The beautiful din, the cacophony that occurred during the passing of the peace that brought so many smiles and laughter as some of us held up signs or waved at one another, called out one another's names. We couldn't plan for that, and yet, unexpectedly, we learned something powerful from that experience. For those who will be here in our sanctuary, a sense of one another's energy and togetherness is critical to our well-being. We want to see each other.
In the future, we don't know how many people will be worshiping with us in our sanctuary on Sunday mornings. Habits are changing. The church is changing. So in 1, 5, or 10 years, will there be 75, 100, 150, 200 people here on Sundays? I don't know the answer to that. But whichever one of those numbers it is, in our current configuration, it means that we are planning for the sanctuary to, at most, be half full.
However many are here, what we do in worship needs to be about togetherness. Where we can, when we can, proximity matters. We want to know deep in our bones that we are seen and we are welcomed. The altar, or a communion table, it's beautiful, but it's so far away from most of us when we worship. We worship God Emmanuel, God with us, not above us or far away from us. We proclaim boldly when we gather at this table for communion that all are welcome. And yet, where the table is placed in our sanctuary does not reflect this welcome. It is even inaccessible for some because it is separated from the gathered community by stairs. Wouldn't it be lovely to have our baptismal font in a place in the sanctuary where the congregation could gather around a family as I baptize their child?
Wouldn't it be wonderful to be able to sit near our amazing choir, to be drawn into the music together as we listen to Perry and Christine and Bill sing close to us, helping us make a joyous noise together? Wouldn't it be wonderful for our sanctuary to be able to accommodate small, intimate services for 20 or 25 on days like Ash Wednesday? And similarly, for us to be able to accommodate 200 or more on a Friday night for a community concert? Wouldn't it be wonderful for our children to feel like they had space in our sanctuary that was just for them? Wouldn't it be wonderful for them to feel like they had more freedom to move? Wouldn't it be wonderful for parents to bring their young children into our space and to be able to sit on a rocking chair with their child during worship?
What if our space gave us more freedom to innovate, to try new things, to experience worshiping together in new ways? One week, we could worship in a traditional format with a traditional liturgy, but turn more easily to one another in conversation immediately following the service. Another week, we could set worship up in a circle and sing in the round. We can imagine lots of possibilities for our worship, but we can also imagine lots of possibilities for the wider community, for our neighbors. Because if we come to understand this space, not as just ours, but as God's, that we are called and blessed to steward and share with others, imagine. Imagine with me for a moment. Imagine having the flexibility to hold art fairs, a play, to be able to dance, to host large band concerts and small quartets, and all sorts of other possibilities. We want more people to see, feel, and experience this beautiful and sacred space.
Of course, we aren't the only church who's had an opportunity to wrestle with a vision for how to be a community hub going forward while also retaining a sense of the sacred in their sanctuary.
Before we dig into what other congregations have done in order to realize their vision for being community hubs by utilizing their worship space in new and interesting ways, I thought we'd spend just a few moments to take a look at Union Congregational Church's own history and see how our sanctuary has changed across the span of time. There is a tendency sometimes to look at our worship space and believe that it has essentially been fixed for 122 years. The worship space was dedicated on November 11th, 1900, but by the end of World War I, a renovation was underway. The Tiffany windows were dedicated in 1920. As you can see in this picture, the pulpit is in the center of the chancel. There is a wooden screen behind which the choir was situated, and there is a communion table down on the floor, level with the congregation. This is the view from the pulpit, looking back towards the back of the church. You can see that the pews are curved. There is one center aisle, no pews along the side walls. There aren't any chandeliers, nor are there center doors leading out to an assembly room. This is a picture from 1944, a question that Tim Christ raised as he put these pictures and a presentation together after combing the archives was, where is the pulpit in this picture? 1944, we can't see the wooden screen. These are the combined choirs of Union Church for a festival service taking place. And we don't know where the pulpit is, and we're not quite sure where the wooden screen is. So perhaps there was already an element of flexible worship space during World War II. As you can see, the communion table is on the floor in this picture, but also the baptismal font is as well over to the right. By the early 1950s, a complete renovation had taken place. Choir stalls had been set up on the sides of the chancel area. A rust-colored carpet had been installed. The wood had been stained a much lighter color. And as you can see, there are new pews that are not in an angled fashion anymore, but are in a rectilinear arrangement. This was done to increase the seating capacity by about 80 more places. In the mid-1970s, there was a terrible fire at Union, and so the worship space was renovated again due to that terrible incident. There was chandeliers installed. The woodwork was painted or stained in a dark wooden tone. You can now see that there are doors out to the assembly room. There is a new molding that is added to the back wall with a cross made from wood that is salvaged after the fire. This is the chancel area. Slate flooring has been installed in the chancel area, and there's open ironwork for the railings. The wood paneling has been stained dark. There's new tall screens with a quatrefoil motif covering the organ chambers, and a number of other renovations that took place if you compare the pictures along the way. The larger point is that about once a generation or so, Union has endeavored to change its worship space in some capacity. 1900, the building was dedicated. The end of World War I, the Tiffany windows were added. And in the early 1950s, there was a complete renovation, including an expansion of the chancel. The pulpit was moved from the center over to the right. A lectern was installed on the left-hand side. There was new seating, new colors, and the movement of the communion table up into the chancel area. In the mid-70s, there was a complete renovation in an English Norman style following the fire. And now we find ourselves in 2022 wondering where we should go from here after enduring a global pandemic. In order to imagine what we could become going forward, it's good to get some ideas from other communities to see how they have incorporated their desire to be a community hub with their worship space. Maybe the best example to show you that I've seen at least is Wesley Church Center in Chester, England. They're a Methodist congregation. They first formed in 1812. They have some stained glass that they're quite proud of. This is their sanctuary in about 2015. As you can see, they've got some pews and things are looking a little cluttered in the back. And they knew that they wanted to update their sanctuary to make it a little more comfortable for the worshiping community, but were struggling to figure out how they could also incorporate their worship space into their ministry to the wider community in Chester, England. They knew they wanted to be a community hub, and the question was, how were they going to go about doing that? And so the renovation they undertook ended up producing this. As you can see, the stained glass is a central feature of the worship space. The floors have been lightened and the color scheme for the paint has been changed and flexible seating has been added. Of course, the seating can be moved into a variety of configurations for a variety of different groups, as we'll see in just a few moments. This is a view back towards their chancel area, which is looking bare at the moment in this picture, but can be utilized in a variety of ways. As you can see by the screens, they've also attempted to incorporate modern technology into an old worship space. This is a view from their balcony down towards the seating. And this is a worship service that is taking place on a Sunday morning. I presume that baptism is about to take place. There's a gentleman standing over by the piano holding a baby, and there is a baptismal font in the center of the space. As you can see, the piano is close to where people are singing, and the congregation is able to encircle the baptismal font while the service takes place. I also assume that if there is a choir, it's down at the bottom left of the picture, that they are a part of the group singing with the rest of the congregation. This, though, is a community concert that is taking place. There are dozens of musicians in the back of the chancel, and in front of them, there are dozens of vocalists about to lead the community in a concert. The concert space is intimate. You can see that the front row of seating is quite close to the vocalists, and the space is made to fit the crowd that will gather for this performance. On the other side of things, there is a ministry called Open Table that Wesley offers during the week. Sometimes they have small groups, and so the worship space, at least in the chancel, has been reformatted to accommodate a discussion group for perhaps 12 or 15 people. This is another aspect of the Open Table service where they're going to serve communion that night, I think. The piano has been pulled much closer to the people who will gather, and there's even a little Christmas tree that's been brought into the space. These paper cutouts of footprints, I presume, are for children who are worshiping on a Sunday morning. Having flexible space enables the worship leaders to be able to incorporate children more fully into the worship experience of the community by providing for both play and freedom of movement, deploying art within their worship services in order to accommodate children. Speaking of art, as you can see here, by having flexible space, Wesley is able to display art and move it around if they so choose. This particular installation is being offered for a Sunday service where they will be speaking about creation. You can see the bottom, if you squint just right, that the text says everything was created through him, nothing, not one thing came into being without him. And so in the background, you can also see several chairs around small tables. Perhaps this service is intentionally built around dialogue. And they have also made sure, though, to incorporate some of the traditional aspects of their worship space pre-renovation. In talking to some of the leaders at Wesley, they have intended to use a number of their pews. Some people still prefer to sit in them, and so the pews are arranged around the outer edge of the sanctuary, and some traditionalist members much prefer to sit there. These pews have been arranged in order to generate a prayer space. A deacon of the church always sits here during worship services, and people can walk over and receive prayer as they have a need. There is also some references to their history on the wall, and they've done a good job of trying to incorporate some of the traditions of the congregation into this bold new thing. Because they are a community hub now, they have the ability to host all kinds of different groups for different activities. This is an antique show that's taking place inside their sanctuary. In order to become a community hub, Wesley believed that they needed to provide the opportunity for people to eat or have something to drink while they are present at Wesley. And so they created the Wesley Cafe. They have plays on a regular basis. This is just a small selection from their performances this late winter and spring, Fire from Heaven and Jack and the Beanstalk playing in April. They do a good job of inviting the community into the space. They want the community to use the space because they believe that the space belongs to the community as much as it does to the congregation. And so on their website, you can see in the top corner, you have the ability to hire within the church, and the worship area is one of those. But of course, the space is still sacred to the worshiping community, to those who gather on Sundays and for special services during the week. They're very proud of what they've been able to do to accommodate the community of Chester into the life of their worship community, but they still find peace and tranquility and calm amidst the storms of life in this place that they call sanctuary. There are many congregations in the United States that have undertaken renovations in their sanctuary in order to accommodate this concept of being a community hub. This is a congregation that Katrina and some of our youth group members are familiar with. It's First Congregational Church of Memphis. As you can see, they have a flexible worship design that fully incorporates both worship space and a heavy emphasis on arts in their community. This is First Congregational of Boulder, a UCC congregation that's a little bit larger than ours that has incorporated flexible worship space into their sanctuary. And a slightly smaller congregation also in our tradition would be First Congregational of Washington, D.C. Of course, there are plenty of churches in other traditions that have also undertaken renovations to their sanctuary. If we look at the spaces that are more cathedral-like in nature, this is St. Bart's Episcopal in New York City, and of course there is St. John the Divine also in New York. It isn't just Protestant congregations that have undertaken these kinds of flexible space renovations over the last number of decades. This is St. Vincent de Paul's of Albany, New York, a Carmelite monastery in Baltimore, and Padre Sarah Parish near Oxnard, California. There's also, in churches closer to home, St. Mark's in the Bowery, and St. Paul's Chapel, also in New York City. Clearly, there are many congregations in both England and the United States, and of course other countries, that have undertaken these kinds of renovations in order to further live into their mission to be community hubs.
You can see how the changes to their space led to a sense of innovation and invitation. And it is my hope that that same desire for both innovation and invitation will lead you to affirm our first two commitments of our vision: to support experimentation and innovation to elevate our worship services in ways that inspire spiritual growth and foster sacred experiences that connect us to God and one another.
Transform our sanctuary to further enhance connection, flexibility, and creativity in worship, while also providing for greater accessibility for worshipers and the wider community. You are invited to join us on March 13th, where we'll have both a worship service and a second-hour conversation dedicated to many of the things that we have discussed in this video. There'll also be a Zoom conversation in the evening of March 15th, and as always, you can find material, conversation, and information on loveunionsjourney.com. Thanks for watching.